عالعالي على العالي اركضوا بالحقالي على العالي
صاروخوا عالعالي على العالي اركضوا بالحقالي على العالي قولوا للحرية احنا جينا وافرحوا افرحوا
يا ليل يا حب يا دروب يا حجار
حقونا عالشجرة البرية
طلع على الضوء طلع على الريح طلع على الشمس طلع على الحرية يا حرية زهرة نوية
يا طفل وحشي يا حرية غيروا أساميكن إذا فيكن لون عيونكن إذا فيكن
غيروا أساميكم إذا فيكم لولا عيونكم إذا فيكم
خبوا حريتكن بجنابكن واهربوا اهربوا
عالضوء عالريح عالشمس عالبر
عبيادر مضوية ومنسية
طلع على الضوء طلع على الريح طلع على الشمس طلع على الحرية
يا حرية زهرة نارية طفل وحشي يا حرية
to support our community and to oops, I'm not sharing anymore, or I am sharing. Okay, thank you. And we connect and collaborate with others, so it's not just only the Arab American community, but people who are allies and working on similar issues like ours. I love to share our vision because I think it's an important one and gives the spirit of what we do. Now we're trying to create a culture where Arab Americans are included, understood, and represented and presented with dignity and accuracy. And I'll say more about why is that important for us. We were established 7 years ago by a group of women. Right now we have 10 members on the board who are committed and ambitious women. I was gonna say fierce, but fierce had in my dictionary had negative connotations, and I don't mean to say we're fierce, but we're leaders and we're very ambitious, not violent and not all the different interpretations of fierce. It was an interesting one. We have different committees working on outreach, engaging Arab Americans and others, allies, in planning events such as the annual gala to celebrate Women's Day and the monthly speaking events such as the one I'm sharing here. One of them was last fall on Arab women shifting struggles and resistance. And of course, our collaboration today, such as collaborating on the book talks and other events. We also like to have some fun and network with others. So this is a picture of some of the active members of NAWA and some of the board members. You might know some of them, but we plan lunch events and networking events for our members. And then we have our outreach, education outreach program. The idea behind it is to bring people to work on this piece of the misconceptions, invisibility of Arab Americans, and to try to contribute to the understanding, but also correcting some of the biases that we see, especially in school curricula, textbooks, and in pedagogy. And then we have a more recent and newer program where we have a youth project trying to support Arab Americans who are interested in educating others, informing their peers and teachers about who they are, and with pride and respect. We hold events, and we had that in the past. Of course, before the pandemic, we had teacher appreciation for some of the counties around us. I'm in Virginia, and most of us are here in Virginia, Maryland, and DC. And we also hold professional development workshops. We, for example, we presented at the National Conference for Social Studies on including the diverse faces of Arab Americans. You can actually listen to this presentation on our website as well. And we tackle difficult, important topics such as what do we teach? What do they teach our children? And how Israel intervenes in what we teach here in US schools in social studies. And as you see, one of our members, Jehan Andoni, is part of that, was part of that panel. And then I think that, as an organization that's 7 years old, I think there's some areas of growth that I see as Ilham, and speaking as myself here. I think that we need to work more on the national, the N in NAWA, making sure that we reach to all states. And that's why I think such opportunities like this book talk are very important for us to reach a wider audience and bring people, because we are all volunteers. And so we need as much help as we can to expand and to work more on social studies curricula, history, and others as we grow. I think that we need to work more on the advocacy piece and collaborations on that. And then I think we need to grow our membership and our board. So if anyone, and men are also welcome, and everyone who's in between are welcome to join NAWA and welcome to actually work and collaborate with us and join the board if interested and if approved, of course, by our fierce group of women. Thank you, and here is the website if you need any further information. I appreciate the collaboration and thank you for your audience.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to introduce PFC and Ashgan, and then we'll get started. PFC, Palestinian Feminist Collective, is a US-based body of Palestinian and Arab women and feminists committed to Palestinian social and political liberation by way of confronting systemic gendered and colonial violence, oppression, and dispossession. We entered this event as feminists and as Arab Americans coming together to offer our respect and commitment to those who have dedicated their lives' work to liberation and dignity, generation after generation. So with Dr. Ajour as our guest this morning, we honor that our incarcerated people in Palestine are resisting all forms of Israeli mental and physical incarceration. This includes Ahmed Mansara, a young Palestinian man who has been in prison since he was 13 and has passed his last 7 birthdays in Israeli prison. We joined the Palestinian Global Mental Health Network and its call to all international colleagues in mental health and all persons of conscience to demand the immediate release of this young Palestinian man and to his family. So please find the link to their petition, which has just been dropped in the chat. And in this spirit, we are honored to be speaking with Dr. Ajour about her groundbreaking work, which centers both the humanity and knowledge of Palestinian hunger strikers. That is, as she states, by quote unquote, uplifting the discourse of hunger strikers and centering, quote, their philosophy of freedom and self-determination in our discussions and theorization of Palestinian liberation and liberation movements. So Dr. Ajour completed her PhD in sociology at Goldsmith University of London. She is currently an incoming postdoctoral research fellow at Brown University. Her research interests and teaching experience are situated in sociology, gender studies and feminist theories and movements, political subjectivity, incarceration, decolonization, and global indigenous politics. And she is taught at both the UK at Goldsmith, Warwick University, and in Palestine at Birzeit University. Her other work recently includes an article entitled "The Spiritualization of Politics and Technologies of Resistance, Conceptualizing Hunger Striking Subjectivity." Her book launch for the book today will be held on May 25th at University of Warwick, and we will share a link to that event in the chat as well. So Dr. Ajour, thank you so much for being with us today. We can get started with our first question, which is about...
Can I thank you first?
Yes, of course, please.
Thank you so much, Layla, for this generous introduction. Like, I really want to say that I'm honored to be with you today. And thank you for the Palestinian Collective and the National Arab American Women's Association, for inviting me and for making a space for this book. And I'd like to thank Amanda, big thank you for Amanda, really, for her time and effort to organize this event. And of course, my deepest gratitude goes to my academic community of Palestinian women who offered invaluable, really, support by providing comments to revise chapters of my book. So I will mention their name. Thank you, Lubna, Jennifer, Iman, Amanda, Sarah, Nairuz. So all these beautiful people are in my book acknowledgement. I'm sending lots of love, and the idea of this book talk came from our meetings. So thank you so much for all of you.
Academia really is a collective effort. Yeah. So we'll start with your book. This book is groundbreaking. It is the first systematic study of key features of Palestinian hunger strikes, in part because it responds to a critical lack of literature on this topic. So what do you feel are the main contributions of your work to this topic? And if you want to provide any anecdotes that give insight to your work, feel free to.
Yeah. Before the contribution, just to give brief background, this book is based on 85 in-depth interviews, which I conducted between 2015 and 2018 with Palestinian former hunger strike after a short time of their release. So the book investigates the lived experience of Palestinian political prisoners who went on hunger strike to protest what is called administrative detention. And this is a policy used by Israeli authorities whereby Palestinian detainees are held in detention without court or trial. And before starting my research in 2014, hunger strike was a prominent phenomenon, it was contemporary form of resistance. And I witnessed the hunger strike before I started my research. I was part of solidarity movement with the prisoners' cause. And today I just wanted to point out that today is the 78th hunger strike of Khalil Awauda. Now he's on hunger strike. So hunger strike has a long history since 67, sorry, but it's contemporary and it's still happening until now. In terms of contribution, I would say that when I first started my research in 2014, I haven't found any academic study devoted to investigate the lived experience of hunger strike. There are body of literature about incarceration and captivity and Palestinian political prisoners, but the absence of any academic study on this ongoing phenomena compelled me to research this critical form of resistance in Palestinian context. So I found out that there are theoretically informed literature on hunger strike in Northern Ireland and Turkey and other case study, but there was absence of such literature about hunger strike in Palestine. So I would say that this book is my contribution toward filling this gap in the literature on anti-colonial hunger strike resistance by developing in-depth account of the meaning, the dynamics that the hunger strike they give to their experience. And I have contribution on theoretical level. I think that the book also offers a critical contribution to theory of political subjectivity. So it theorized the formation of subjectivity of hunger striking, drawing on Fanon's theory of revolutionary violence and Foucault's thesis on technologies of the self, as well as Badiou's account of political subjectivity. So while critically combining these approaches, I also problematize them from the vantage point of the Palestinian hunger strike. So I would say that without a case study, without empirical investigation grounded in in-depth interviews, I wouldn't be able to develop these theories. But I would say that the main objective of the book is to contribute to the study of Palestinian struggle and to give voice to the discourse of hunger striker and their philosophy of freedom, their philosophy of self-determination, because like the book seeks to articulate their own philosophy around weaponization of the body as a mean of reclaiming dignity and humanity, the way they like theorize their own battle. Maybe the third contribution is on methodological level, because I extended the methodological framework to include heart and intimacy, which I called in my methodology a language of the heart. So I draw on feminist decolonial ethnography to do justice to the complex experience of hunger strikers. And we can talk about methodology later, but this would be one of the contributions. Yeah.
We absolutely will talk about methodology, so we will get to that very soon. But before that, can you talk about the opening of your book and the three stories, or the story of the three flowers, the lily, the sunflower, and the daffodil, and their significance to you and the work itself? You have a picture of them behind you so folks can see it. But do you want to talk about the flowers very quickly?
Yeah, very quickly. Okay, so I opened my book with a dedication. So I dedicate these flowers to the research participants, and the artist Tala Lulu, she read this dedication and she produced the book cover, as you mentioned, Layla. So this is like the painting. She tried to capture the dedication after she like read it. And in my book, so this is the book cover, as you can see. So in my dedication, I said these flowers are dedicated to the research participants who survived cruel battles and carried the resistance of their spirit to achieve their dream of freedom and emancipation. Their heartbeats were louder than this. So I said that each flower has a connotation that is deeply rooted in Palestinian culture, and each flower has a tale to tell. And symbolically, like the hunger strikers, they lived their experience between the lilies, sunflower, and daffodils. And there is like, as I said, they are rooted in Palestinian culture. For example, the white lilies articulated in our Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish in his poem, A Soldier Dreams of White Lilies. So white lilies symbolize the pain, the loss of Palestinian souls, and it's a flower of transcendence love, because they live this spiritual pain and transcendence. Sunflower is the revolutionary flower of freedom that the fighters, the hunger striker, they aspire. So it symbolizes freedom and emancipation, and it's articulated in Fairuz songs. We just played it, Ya Hurriya. Daffodils, it's the hunger strike subjectivity, because this research is like digging in the depths of subjectivity. So it symbolizes like hunger striker subjectivity in their past were the freedom. So it's a journey like in depth to discover the resources of hope and love and resilience and smooth that they have. So this is like what I meant. I try to visualize the research in this dedication, and we dedicated these flowers to the resistant fighters. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Could you reflect very briefly on the history of the hunger strike movement in Palestine for those present who perhaps aren't as familiar? So like when, how, and why it evolved as a tactic of resistance, and how it exists today?
Yeah. So Israel prison is a site of resistance, and the tactic of hunger strike as a form of resistance, as I said, hunger strike has a long history since '67, and it shows the intensity of resistance, like the intensity of antagonistic struggle between colonized and colonizer. And over history, like since '67, the Palestinian prisoner, they engaged in hunger strike against the oppressive condition in Israeli prisons. it's very extremely tactic of resistance, and in history it led to the deaths of some prisoners. For example, in 70, Abdel Qadir al-Fahim died in 70 in Ascalon prison, and other prisoners as a result of force feeding, and their deaths remain in our collective memory. How they exist today, it's important question, I think. There is a transformation of hunger strike resistance. So the nature of hunger strike has changed with the historical and political transformation and political change of resistance, moving from collective action to improve the condition in the prisons to individual lengthy strike protesting the administrative detention to achieve freedom, not to improve the condition. So, but I would say that there are waves of individual hunger strike since 2012, but they are coinciding with some collective hunger strike as well. But this phenomenon of individual emerged recently since Khader Adnan in 2012. It was a lengthy hunger strike to achieve freedom. So after the decline of collective struggle in the post-Oslo area, the prisoners' movement witnessed a sort of demoralization of collective hunger strike, as I said, since 2012. But although these hunger strike, the individual appear as individual acts, but the discourse of hunger strikers that I interviewed reveals a form of collective and revolutionary politics embedded in these individual hunger strike. So these individual hunger strike inspire the collective and shouldn't be artificially separated from the collective hunger strike. So as I said, they coincide and inspire each other.
A lot of tension between like individual and collective and what is, yeah. And you also talk a lot about, we don't talk about it, but I just want to flag, like you talk a lot about the transformative process of striking and the transformation that happens on an individual level and a collective level. I think that's
like a transformation process is important because all the resistance in Israeli prisons, a form of transforming from victim to the torture of colonizer into a resistant subject. So it's like reclaiming humanity, as I explained. It's a process of reclamation, the dignity and the humanity that the colonizer aimed to dispossess. Yeah.
The next question is quite long, so I'm actually going to paste it in the chat for people to like read visually, but I will also read it out loud. Okay, so you open your book with a discussion about methodology and your positionality, and state that the divide between knowledge and humanity was quote unquote disrupted because the research topic required compassion. You follow this with what you call the search for the language of the heart, which is incentivized by your own quote positionality as an embedded and invested researcher. You explain that you arrive at a feminist decolonial ethnography as a method uniquely capable of doing justice to the complexity of hunger strikers' lived experiences, and suggestively also of attending to your own position as a female Palestinian scholar trained both in Palestine and abroad, specifically in the UK. So can you explain what you mean by language of the heart and this process of arriving at your own specific research methodology?
Yeah. Okay. The interviewees, the research participants, they reported like during the interview when I asked them about this experience that words won't do justice to such complex experience. And even myself in the research process, I felt that the scholarly language and knowledge, which required usually critical distance and controlling emotions, it failed to capture the depth of such existential experience. And this required extending the methodological and theoretical framework, which say little about heart and intimacy. So I discussed this problem. Like I discussed the limitation of language in explaining the human suffering, and I introduced the language from the heart within the framework of feminist decolonizing, like drawing on feminist decolonizing authors and feminist ethnography as well. So like I struggled to rationalize and intellectualize the pain and suffering. And then I decided like I want to break the boundaries, like I want to create my own genre of writing. So I articulated some of the research interviews in a form of storytelling narrative to reflect my own immersive and empathetic engagement like with the research. And I present these writings and the story that I fictionalized, because I fictionalize the interviews, as a form and example of decolonial feminist methodology, introducing like writing from the heart or storytelling from the heart. And I introduced this as a critique of liberal paradigm of thinking, like which is based on rationality, instrumental rationality, and domination of reasons. So this is what I meant by my approach entails disrupting the boundaries between knowledge and the humanity. Like what I mean is I posed this question when I was like describing the process of researching and the process of interviewing. I said, does the way we listen to the story of hunger strikers, people, to the people suffering, the way we listen to them as a human being operate at the same level of listening as researcher, like that we need to be objective and to take distance, to be able to see and all of this. So it was hard for me. And then I researched from within and I wrote this story. Yeah, you asked me about the experience moving from the United Kingdom, I think.
Not moving, but I mean, you wrote about that and you talk about that, but you're training both in Palestine and in the UK, and the complexities of the relationship of the UK to specifically administrative detention to Palestine itself. So existing between the two worlds, like did that at all impact the way you interacted or were received by your narrators?
Yeah. Actually, when I introduced myself that I'm doing like a research in British academia, and I remember like one of them, they commented, Britain is the source of our tragedy. And I wrote this in my methodology. I asked them, like, what do you mean by this? I thought that it's Balfour Declaration, but in fact, they were referring to the administrative detention since it was based on the British Mandate law. Later adopted by Israeli, like the history of administrative detention is a British Mandate law and then adopted by Israeli. So this is like, it's interesting to see, yes, how doing research and like institution that are responsible of people suffering. So like, and how you, so I reflected on all of this and my methodology, and I reflected on my intimate connection in the field, because you asked me about this as well. So this research is really sensitive because it looks, again, it's existential experience and it's a matter of life and death. So that's why it entails high level of intimacy. And when we have emotions and intimacy, this generates the human bonds. This is what I mean by knowledge and the humanity. But so this intimate connection led me to write these stories from the hearts. I remember I said that when I asked one of the participants about the human trajectory of the experience, when I asked questions like about pain and about suffering, like one of them, he said, there are things that are not said but are wept. you know, like when I asked, for example, what you wrote in your will to your loved ones when you are dying in hunger strike, when you are approaching death, what they felt about their loved ones, solidarity, and the starvation, because some of their families, they engage in hunger strike to support them. What you felt in the moment of release, like after this journey of agony and torture, and like when they saw the happiness of their loved ones and mothers. So these moments like entail intimacy and emotions, let alone the suffering and torture during the hunger strike itself. So this connected us on a human level, and it shows that the language, the normal language, is inadequate for them and for me. And this is what I meant by the search for the language from the heart.
Quite a broad question coming up next, but what general challenges did you face in completing this work? How did you navigate the structural, the personal, or the other hurdles that might have otherwise compromised your ability to complete the research and the writing process?
Yeah, I already mentioned some challenges on the interview during the interviews. So there are challenges on the level of interviewing, the writing process, because really the work on this research was very painful and was very hard. It was emotionally exhausted because it originated in the painful stories of hunger strikers for long hours of listening to their stories and their own interpretation to their experience. So like the interviewing process was really hard for me and them. Like it's not only, especially because these interviews occurred a short time after the release of hunger strike, and some of them were in hunger strike, like it was ongoing. So it was really very live phenomenon when I was researching it, and it's still happening until now. I've just mentioned that one of the hunger strike now, 78 in hunger 78 days in hunger strike. So I met also their loved ones while they were in this, while the strike were happening, ongoing. I was part of family's pain and heartbreak. Like I think this was like hard, the most heartbreaking interviews were with the mothers. Like I felt terrible interviewing them. And I remember I wrote this in my research, like one of these mothers, like they told me, I don't know what shall I tell you, they are dying and we are dying with them. So I felt terrible, and I have to stop the interview. And this happens with other interviews during, like when they were recounting their stories, like their cry during the conversation. I also found myself in tears, like in many occasions during the journey. And I said, despite the fact that I'm Palestinian, despite my background, like, and my awareness of the nature of repression, like we live under occupation, the violence in colonized space, but I didn't anticipate this level of human suffering. Like when you listen to the 87, 85 stories, like in details, and you live these stories, listen to the transcription, and you have to rationalize this pain. As I said, it's different. Of course, I'm Palestinian, and we, all of us, we live this collective grieving when Shireen Abu Akleh died. But I felt that this is really different, and yeah, sorry. The writing process was one of the challenges as well. The empirical data was very rich, very complex, and the data required resilience to deal with and to make sense of it. So as I said, I was a container of this pain, and I absorbed like all this pain, and it was hard for me to digest. That's why I experienced this difficulty in writing the interview's transcription. And in the beginning, I remember my strategy was to escape from the empirical data. In the beginning, it was, and actually, I didn't follow up this suggestion to seek counseling in order to deal with like the emotional aspect of the work. I said that this is not individual pain, it's pain, but it's the collective pain of all Palestinians, and I needed to address this pain. It's part of the research process. So to deal with this challenge, I tried to articulate the research interviews in free writing parallel to my scholarly and academic writing in my attempt to produce like scholarly work that genuine and faithful to Palestinian people suffering and to these stories. Yeah. Last thing I want to say about like the field work. It was, as I said, the interviews they were hard for me and for them as well. But they were very motivated to engage in this research, and they strongly welcomed the interview, and they assume that this research is bearing the witness to their suffering, and that was the key reason why they agreed. So their expectation from me that their voices and their stories will be here to expose the Israeli practice. They want their stories to travel the world, and they think that this is their counter narrative. The Israelis has their narrative, and they wanted their counter narrative that has been silenced and misrepresented as well. Like I remember one of them, they said, the Israeli propaganda made us terrorists and racist and suicidal. And through our stories, we want to show who the terrorist is. So it was hard for them, but they strongly welcome this interview.
A lot of humanization or reclaiming humanity on your part as the researcher, and also like the humanity of the project itself, and like the importance of documenting and like giving space. And I mean, we're here today like to do that work of justice, of hearing their narratives and like listening to what. Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we have another question. So you note a common assertion made by Palestinians in prison within Israel who partook in hunger strikes that, quote, hunger is a death for life. And also that they would often say that, like, I love life, I don't want to die. Can you speak a bit about, can you speak a bit more to the settler colonial elimination of the body as it relates to Palestinian subjectivity and agency over the body through the act of hunger strike?
Yeah, sacrificing the body in hunger strike resistance and in their discourses, it's not a discourse of death, it's death for life. It's not a necro-resistance. It's a struggle for freedom and for self-determination. So as you said, their assertion, this for life, means that they don't aim to death in their political action, but to survive. And they are like resistant fighters, because in my research, I wrote about what is the difference between suicide bombers or quote unquote suicide bombers, martyrdom operators, and hunger strikers. So I said that the hunger strikers are like resistant fighters. They go to battle to fight, not to die. And this is a battle. They went on hunger strike not to die. They are not suicidal like what the Israeli propaganda, but they aspire life, they aspire freedom, and their discourse is full of hope, full of love to their loved ones. And the hunger strike phenomena is future-oriented. It's like a battle for freedom and for self-determination. there is a risk of this, and this is a contradictory aspect of hunger strike. Like they desire your life, but there is a probability for death or to endanger the body, and they carry this risk of death. And they are willing to pay the price for freedom. They were saying there is a price for this battle. So the body and the discourse of body, this of life, that's why the book centers on reclaiming humanity. It's a struggle to reclaim the dignity that the colonizer aimed to dispossess, and the book is centered on reclaiming the dignity and the humanity by the resistance. Reclamation of humanity is a process, it's a resistance. Because the colonizer have this project of disposition, and hunger strike is a process of reclamation. The relation with settler colonialism is really important, because all this discourse of sacrificing the body can only understood in relation to the way in which the Zionist settler colonialism aimed at eliminating Palestinian existence, the material and immaterial existence. So their understanding of self-sacrifice linked to reclaiming controlling over their own body. They want to reclaim their fate from the Israelis' prison authority. That's why they said they can do anything with the material body, but they can't reform the soul. They can't have the decision to break the hunger strike. In the negotiation process, while they were dying, they said, I have the decision, I can say no. So they have this control over their fate, and they think that they have the strength because they have a decision, because they have this control. This is like the meaning they give the body. I remember in their political grammar and in their discourse of resistance, they said the body is a bridge for return, and it's part of the discourse of resistance. And here the body is a method of resistance in their philosophy of the freedom, because they don't see the martyr body as a loss, but it's a vector for freedom. Here the body is a method of liberation. So they, like the body, inherited meaning in collective culture and in anti-colonial Palestinian resistance, and it's regarded as an instrument for liberation. That's why we say weaponization of the body. It's a weapon that we use, and it's like, I just want to say, Layla, like their discourse about the body is striking. They said our weakness, our strength in the weakness of the body. So how they employ the body, like to have this agency and this, it's a form of indigenous sovereignty, like in relation with the colonizer in this antagonistic struggle. Like it's, as they said, it's battles of existence. It's battles of wealth. Yeah.
We have a couple of audience questions that I'm going to transition or pass the mic to Uplift. But before that, I want to thank you for answering these questions that we've prepared. Your thought process and your project itself is incredibly illuminating and very heartwarming, and is a great model of how to engage in such pain. So I personally would like to thank you. Okay, so Ilham, do you want to
Yeah,
the audience question?
I mean, I also want to thank you, Ashjan and Layla, for the dialogue that really is very, for anyone who's listening, it feels like so heartwarming, but also there's some sense of sadness. At the same time, there is a sense of resilience in the conversation and in what you've been talking about. I have two questions that I would like to ask, and of course I have many more, but I asked them because I haven't seen questions that came in the chat. But my question to you is, I know you interviewed 80 something people, prisoners who engage in hunger strikes, and you talked about them as a collective in some sense. Do you address the variation, differences, and why people, how they interpret? Like, I know that hunger strike is an act of nonviolence, and there are examples from other places, and I haven't read the book, so you might have addressed that in your book, but there are so many other examples of successful nonviolence attempts like hunger strikes. But were there any variations in their reasoning, in their experiences, in their, like, did faith play a role? What you were describing about the body and the control of my body, because a lot of people believe that this is just temporary, there's life that's more important. So can you address these types of considerations about the prisoners? Yeah.
Thank you, Ilham. Very important question. But I just want to say these are 85 interviews, not all of them with the former hunger strikers, like most of them, around 40 and more. But these interviews, the 85, they include their lawyer representing the prisoners, their families and loved ones, their political parties, activists, human rights and prisoners rights activists. So it's like, and even the political parties, like leaders. And so 85 to research the phenomenon of hunger strike. So, but most of them with the former hunger strikers. Yeah, your question about the differences among them. Of course, I interviewed the prisoners from different background. Their affiliation with Fatah, Hamas, leftist parties, PFLP, and secular parties. And in terms of the differences in their discourse, because you just mentioned the religion, I think what was in their reasoning and their philosophy of freedom and philosophy of weaponization of the body, this aspect of spiritualization of resistance and the soul and body, it was striking for me. Even the prisoners from leftist parties like PFLP, they have this concepts of souls and martyrs. So I think this is shared between among all the hunger strikers, that their ideological and Palestinian collective background was very prominent, like in their discourse of resistance. So even from leftist parties, they were mentioning the soul, like we are resisting because we want to protect the soul, because they know that the colonizer aims to reform the souls, not the body. So all of them, this is common and shared between all of them, employing the body in resistance to protect the soul. And this relation between soul and body is like very dynamic. Body is important and we don't want to endanger, but it's like this resistance, freedom necessitates this resistance. Yeah.
Thank you. There is a question from the audience about how many people won their freedom after hunger striking. Maybe among the ones you interviewed, I don't know how many were hunger strikers, but among those, do you know how many?
Yeah, actually all the research participants that I interviewed after their hunger strike, after they released. And some of them, they engaged in many hunger strikes. For example, I interviewed Khadr Adnan, and after his first hunger strike, I think, and then he engaged in a second hunger strike. So all of them, they achieved their freedom after like long journey. And as I said, the individualized hunger strike, very lengthy, starting from 2012, it used to be shorter than now we have 70 days, 80 days, some of them 100, because of course it relates to the Israeli occupation and the way they manipulate the hunger strike and extend it, etc.
All right, I have a question, and I saw there's another one, so let me ask the academic question first. You described your methodology that was very involved and of course emotional, and you put yourself out there when you were doing your research. Here in the US, when we do that in academia, especially the Palestinian and Arab academics, we are actually told in many circles that this doesn't count as research because you are a participatory researcher and it's not rigorous, which you talked about a little bit at the beginning. What do you tell these people? Because I think there might be here some people who are juniors and want to do this kind of work, but they're worried about their tenure, you don't have tenure in the UK, I know, but we have that problem here in the US, or the backlash, the being blacklisted, which happens here too at universities in the US.
I would say fight. If you believe.
Like a good Palestinian, fight.
If you believe in your ideas, and it's not easy, I can really understand. And I went through this as a student, we don't have the power. You are a student, but like what I mean by fight and maybe negotiate, like it's negotiate in terms of we want to experiment, like if you want us to be innovative, like in our research methodology, because this is a trend now, we need like to break the boundaries and to do something new, that to produce a groundbreaking like research and to contribute. But my advice, this is the revolutionary advice, but I think we need to do this experimentation, but at the same time, we need to foreground it on some references and evidence. That's why when I come up with the language of the heart, of course, I use feminist decolonizing author and feminist ethnography. I'm not the first one, like I used many, but the case study, sometimes it produces something new. Yeah, so this is like what I would advise them to experiment. And I think the authentic research will produce something, like sometimes you are surprised from yourself in the research process. I always like, really, this research transformed me, like in personal level. I'm not the same person, and it disrupted me. Like it's like we are experimenting with the self as well. Yeah,
absolutely. You know, I was trained in the 90s on the idea that you don't do research in your backyard, but I think now we're into the orientation of actually dig in your backyard. It's important, and that's where your heart is. You know, I think you're doing wonderful job with that. There's a question here about, here we go. To what extent did the hunger strikers identify with or receive solidarity, camaraderie, inspiration from non-Palestinian hunger strikers from other global anti-imperial struggles or their families and allies? And do you include that in your book? I was curious about this question as well.
I missed you, Ilham. Sorry, I was reading like a question. Sorry.
So the question is from Selma, who says, to what extent did the hunger strikers identify or receive any solidarity from non-Palestinian hunger strikers? You know, like there are examples around the world. To what extent they do get that? And were there some inspiration there? Can you say more about that?
This is very important question. Yeah, of course, there is like inspiration. Like in my interviews with the hunger strikers, they always mention the revolutionary of the words, like, and they were, for example, in Northern Ireland, Bobby Sands, and all this heritage of resistance. So it's always been like inspiration for them. And they mentioned this in their hunger strike when I was dealing with the concept of sumud. One of the chapter, I think chapter 14 was on sumuds and the sources of the strength they have and the generation of sumud in their hunger strike. So I found out that the icon of resistance, the revolutionary on international level, like they were with them in the battle, and it fed their resistance and resilience and endurance. So it's always been like inspiration for them and for the hunger strikers. Yeah, and actually the power of hunger strike is the mobilization. So it's not only the national, on national level, the Palestinian inspiration, but also the international inspiration. This is like the logic of hunger strike, to put pressure on the state and to mobilize the public and the international. Like they are staging hunger strike. We are existing here. We have a cause. And this solidarity and this international solidarity is like key and crucial for them in their battle. Yeah.
Yeah, I could never find an English word that reflects sumud. I think, I don't know, maybe others did, but it's a very strong, strong.
Yeah, and it's like sumud, it's this concept in Palestinian resistance, but in the context of hunger strike, the meaning of sumud is means that to sustain the battle to the end and not to break.
Yeah.
And I focus on this temporal moment when I was like studying, like, because the question was, it's not only why they engage in hunger strike and endanger the body, but it's also how they sustain it, despite the fact that they were exercised to all forms of torture and violence during the battle. And I said the negotiation, oh my God, there is like one chapter about the negotiation stage. It's a battle in a battle.
Yeah.
Like they were negotiating to be released after this date or this date. And this shows the agency and the self-determination I was talking about. So yeah, sumud, its meaning in the hunger strike is striking, like to sustain it. They refused many offers in the negotiation, and they want to reach agreement with the prison authority on their own terms, like even if it was one day.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean by agency over the body. I have the decision to say no. They were saying that we are dying in hospital, but I can say no, and I feel the strength. Because I have a decision, and because I'm armed with will, and I'm armed with my own like control over my body.
Layla, should we take one more question, or do you want to end it? It's already 2:02. Is that? Should I take another question?
Yeah, I think if folks are, oh my gosh, sorry. I think if folks are here to like continue listening and people are still interested, we can take like one or two more. It's not.
Okay, so maybe we'll go with the negotiation question because you already started talking about the importance of negotiation phase of the hunger strike, and how at least, you talked about that, the counter model of negotiation in comparison to the Palestinian leadership negotiations in the peace process. Could this counter model also be seen as part of the revolutionary subjectivity in reclaiming leadership of resistance?
Exactly. I like this counter model because this revolutionary politics that the hunger striker represents, this take distance from the liberal politics of Palestinian leadership, of course. And I wrote many articles about the violence that the hunger strikers live between the violence of occupation and the violence of Palestinian authority. I was surprised that there are some hunger strikers who went on hunger strike in Palestinian prisons as well. The same tools of violence and torture, and the same tool of resistance, which is the hunger strike, sadly, like in Palestinian prisons. So of course, these prisoners take distance from Oslo politics and its counter model um, of politics. And I think in this moment of deterioration of national project, this moment of demoralization of collective struggle, I believe that this resistance, even though it's individualized, it's the pulse of Palestinian resistance. That means even if it's individualized military action, individualized hunger strike, but it inspired the collective struggle. And as I said, we don't need to artificially separate it from the collective because it's inspired. And I saw many hunger strike individual, like it's developed to be collective. For example, one of the prisoners from PFLP, he was on individual hunger strike, and all the party in the prisons, like all the people from PFLP, they engaged in hunger strike to show solidarity. So it moved from individual to collective. Yeah.
So I think, thank you, Dana, thank you, Ashjan, and back to you, Layla. Thank you so much.
I think we're ready to close out, but I just want to thank everybody for attending and being so engaged. I think this was a really informative, rich discussion. And thank you very much for Dr. Ajour joining us from the UK with the time differences, and for speaking so passionately about both the content and the process of writing this book and reading or researching it. Thank you, Ilham, for co-sponsoring and participating and helping out with this. And thank you to everybody who has attended and stayed this long. So yeah.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.